So in this video, we're going to go over how all the pieces were put together in order to achieve the video that you just saw. First, blowing apart this barrel and having all the pieces fly out. We have a little explosion. And then we had our robot kind of flying back, his head and arm flying off, which is kind of the next step to making a ragdoll is making some of the pieces and parts flying apart. So let's start by going into Blender and seeing how we made this barrel. So here we are in Blender, and we're looking at a barrel. I just made a barrel, nothing special, just a cylinder with some extruded ribs there, and extruded a little lip for the rim. But I want to go over a couple of things that you want to make sure to do. One, the barrel by default is going to be solid, and so when we break it apart in pieces, it will look solid, and we don't want the pieces blowing apart in Unity to be solid. So they need to be hollow. Basically, we want to make a hollow barrel. And so we can do that just by using our Boolean operator. What I have here is I've created a Boolean operator. I just add modifier, pick Boolean. So I've added a Boolean modifier. And then what I want to do is I want to hollow out the middle of it. So I got another cylinder here that I made. And so if we just hit numpad 7, we're going to grab X. We're going to want to center it here in the X and Y direction. And then just numpad 1, we center it in the Z direction to give about the same amount to the top and the bottom. And then what we're going to want to do is, if we select our barrel, we can select the object we want to do the difference with. And we can't see our inside barrel, so if we hit Z wireframe, you can see I've already done this, but we can see the black here. That's the object we want. So we just hit the little eyedropper, and then you pick the little black line there, and it's going to select that to do the difference, and then you'll just pick this drop down and click apply. So I've already done that here. Let's go back to solid. Just undo that move. So now what we're going to want to do is we want to break this into pieces. So what we can use is we can use this object quick effects. So if you look under quick effects, we can turn on the quick effect to break this apart. So we go into that preferences, we scroll down to object cell fracture, and we enable that. So now when we select this and we select object and we go to quick effects, we see this cell fracture. Lots and lots of options. What I found for this barrel is to keep it, I want bigger pieces, and what I want to do is I want to set the number of the limit, say to 20. Then if you press OK, what it's going to do is it's going to break that apart into pieces. That's maybe a little high. So you can play around with that number to get the number of pieces you want. But I made one that, again, I played around with those numbers and got it to be a little bit better. And we'll see that. Right here. So again, there's a lot of differences in whether you want all even pieces, where you want some to be small, some to be big. Really doesn't matter because they're going to be blowing apart anyway. So the next thing we do is we want to select this and we want to export it. course, to Unity. So we'll export it. I've exported it to barrel parts into my project. So let's go back to that project and take a look at getting that into our scene. So now we're back in our Unity project. We can see our solid barrel. So we need a solid barrel. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be replacing that solid barrel with the broken apart barrel once we want to see it blow apart. And we can see that when we brought it in, we can see all the separate pieces here, because each piece is a separate, it's a separate entity in and of itself, but they're all children. They're all pieces that are children of the parent. This barrel part is the parent. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag this onto our scene. And we can see it's a little bigger and it doesn't have any material. It's a different material than our barrel. So what we can do is we can drop that down and expand that. We can select all of them and we can select all of the materials at once. And so what we're going to do is we are going to select it to gray. So what it essentially did is assign all those parts to gray. And then it's a little bigger. So what we'll do is we'll go into our barrel. We will just, I'm just going to copy and paste the scale size, and all the X, Y, and Z were all the same. So now we have a barrel parts that's the same size, same color as our barrel. And then we're going to click and drag that back over to meshes. What I usually do is imports is where I import into. That's the raw mesh. And then any changes and assignments I do in the scene, then I drag over to meshes. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this barrel parts for our scene. So now that that's done, I can just delete, I can delete this off of our scene. And what's going to happen is when we get over to our script part, when the barrel is struck by our projectile, we're going to replace the barrel with the barrel parts and let it blow apart. So let's hop over to our script and get some things wired up. But before we do that, what we're going to do is we are going to look at a couple other pieces. We have our solid barrel, and we have a little fire explosion, because what's going to happen when we hit the barrel is we're going to want to add this little explosion to to our barrel. So that's what it looks like. I did another video on how to create this exact explosion. I'll put that link in the description for anybody who wants to take a look at that. We might want to make it a little bit bigger. We'll play around to get everything looking good once we get all these pieces put together in the script. But I wanted to show you all the pieces that we're going to be using and kind of how we got them in here. So now let's go to the script and get some things wired together. One thing I forgot before we go over to our script is there's one other thing that we have to add to our barrel parts. Let's drag this guy back in. What we need to do is we need to give each one of these some physical properties. And so what we can do is we can highlight all of them because we want to give them all the exact same property. Go over here to add component. We want to go to physics. We want to add a box collider to each one of these, and they will all overlap and they kind of all interact with each other. It usually doesn't cause an issue. We could do a mesh compiler or on each one. You can try out different ones, but the box collider will work for this demonstration. And that's, they need a collider, otherwise they'll just fall right through the plane. And then we need to give each one a rigid body because they need mass. Without mass, they're not going to kind of fly through the air and drop down with gravity. So now that we all have that, well, can kind of see what's going to happen. Let's go to the game. Let's play. What's going to happen is that now that they all have colliders, it's going to kind of blow apart on its own because all those box colliders are all overlapping, and Unity doesn't like overlapping colliders. I'm not sure if that's what causes it, but typically that's what happens, and we want it to blow apart anyway. So I think that gives nice pieces. You can see now why we want this hollow, because see, now it looks like actual pieces of barrel, right, and not solid chunks. So now that we took care of that, we can go over to our scripting. So if you watched my previous video, this should look somewhat familiar. Essentially what we have in this script is two pieces of script. The main one we're looking at right now is this projectile hit. So this is attached to the projectile that we're going to be firing, and what it's going to do is inside of its on collision enter, it's going to check out what it's collided with. That is the heart of this script. Before we look at that, we'll look at a couple serialized fields we got. We have added this explosion, which is going to be a game object, which is going to show our fireball when our barrels hit, and then the barrel pieces. Remember when we made those barrel pieces, this is going to replace the barrel in the scene when the projectile hits the barrel. These explosive force and upward force we'll get to in a little bit, but for now we're just focused on the barrel itself. So we just have this game object, it's a member variable, and a boolean is barrel exploding, because once we hit the barrel, we don't want the projectile to keep hitting pieces of the barrel, and you can get multiple hits on a collision. So once we hit the barrel, we just don't want to do anything else with that collision. So now inside of our collision, what we're going to do is we're going to get the game object, what we hit. I'll keep it good guy. It was, this is script from my previous video where we were hitting one of our characters that we were making a ragdoll. I called it good guy. I'm just going to keep that here because we're going to check what we hit. So what we want to do is we want to check, did we hit the barrel? So we say if the good guy's null, always best to check to make sure our game object is not null. The name we're going to check is barrel. So that is what I call my barrel. So it's going to say, did I hit the barrel and am I not currently exploding? Because I've already hit the barrel and I'm exploding. I don't want to do any of this again. So we set this as exploding to true. Make sure we don't re-enter inside of this. We want to instantiate the barrel pieces, and we want to put it at the position exactly where the barrel is. A little different way of doing this. For the explosion, we'll check if the explosion's not null, and if they've assigned an explosion, we can instantiate the explosion just with a single parameter, and then actually we're going to insert it at the contact point. We could have given the contact point within this and done this identity, but just a little different way of assigning your instantiation. So we could have also put it at the center of the barrel with the exact same position. But again, a little different way of doing it. The contact point is actually where the projectile contacted the barrel's box collider. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the good guy active to null, because what we want to do basically is turn off the barrel. The barrel's going to go away, or at least be hidden and inactive, and the exploding barrel is going to take its place. And if we didn't hit the barrel, we hit the the robot behind it, but we're not gonna do anything with that right now. We're gonna first, let's get the barrel exploding first, and then we'll take care of the good guy, or the robot, in a minute. So let's take a look at what this looks like in action. So we're back at our Unity scene. Again, one thing I did, and one thing you got to remember, is this fire explosion is a visual effect asset. You have to assign it underneath an object, a game object. You know, that's why they let you over here when you make 3D object, or you can create an empty object. So basically I just created an empty object and put my fire explosion under that, because otherwise you can't assign it to use it as an object in your script. So if we look at this laser projectile complete, what we can see is we have our explosion. We drag the fire explosion object into this one. We dragged our barrel pieces, which we brought in to this one. And again, currently we're not using these two, so we're not using those for the barrel. One thing I did try is that the barrel is really flying apart more than I would like, and so I went in and I opened it up. What I did is I assigned all these to a mesh collider, marked it convex. So I just removed that box collider and assigned it to a mesh collider. Again, it's more complicated, but it does provide a better exploding force, or at least the pieces flying apart. So let's run this, see what it looks like. Press space bar. So we got our barrel flying apart, we got our explosion. Not bad. The explosion's not as nice as I would like. One thing to note, if you are working with VFX graph and you've watched any of my other videos on that explosion, is that I made the explosion on Unity 2022. They changed around the VFX graph for Unity 6. I'm running Unity 6 right now. And when I brought it across, I copy and pasted it into this project, and they changed some of the output modules and how it interacted with the visual effect graph. So I needed to modify both the shaders and my visual effect and do a bunch of rearranging. I didn't spend a lot of time doing it. I'd like that fireball to look a little nicer, but it's good enough for now, good enough for this demonstration. So what we can see is we have our exploding barrel, but really now it's not affecting our robot at all. And what we need to do is I will show next how to add an explosive force and apply it to that robot. And we're not only gonna just make the robot a ragdoll, but we're gonna make some pieces and parts fly off of that robot. So let's take a look at that next. So what we're looking at here is the script that's attached to the projectile. So when the projectile hits something, this is the script that runs. We've looked at this before. As far as the explosion of the barrel, so what I've done is I've added 2 new serialized fields. I have this bone name 1 and bone name 2, and we'll see what these are used for in a minute. So what we have is added a function to this if when we hit the barrel. So we hit the barrel, we've exploded the barrel, we saw that, and now there's an extra function here, add explosive force. So what this is going to do is we didn't have any explosive force blowing apart the barrel. It was simply all of the kind of the overlapping collisions that kind of blew it apart. So we add an explosive force because what we're going to do is we want to make an explosion that knocks the robot over. And what I did is I made it a function. We could have done it in line, but it's a good idea just to keep your code more readable, to split things off into functions, even if they're only called once, just because it makes it a lot more readable. So now when we go down to the explosive force, it's going to do several things. It's going to accept a position. So this is the position where the explosive force should be applied to. And if we look up here, it's going to be applied to the contact point. Basically, the point where our projectile hit the barrel is the point of the explosive force that's going to be generated. So what we need to do is we need to find all of the rigid bodies within a certain circumference in order to apply the explosive force to. So just applying the explosive force does not make things blow apart, because the system doesn't know, it doesn't automatically go through and find all the rigid bodies and apply the force to it. You have to do that yourself. And so what you can do is you can do this physics overlap sphere. And what I am using is the explosion radius. So remember, we had an explosion radius. Again, it's another serialized field of what is the radius of this explosive force. So I'm going to find all of the colliders, meaning all of the colliders that are attached to something, one of our objects. And remember, we have colliders attached to all the bones, because remember, we made a ragdoll out of our robot, and the ragdoll has colliders attached to all the bones. And so the parent of those colliders is going to be the bone names. And that's why we use this bone name 1 and bone name 2. We could apply it to every single collider attached to every single bone in the Ragdoll robot, but you can actually, if you think of it, you can control kind of how the explosive force affects the robot by deciding which bone to apply it to, because those are the only bones that are going to move. So if you can imagine, if you apply it to the head is going to get all the force, and maybe the body gets some force because the head is connected to the body, but a majority of the force will be applied to the head or the arm, and maybe it goes to the left, right, spins around, does something, because the force is not applied to the whole body, but just part of the body. So we can control that and see the difference and see what happens by using some of the different bone names. So it's going to come through, it's going to say, hey, is the collider name one of these bone names? And if it is, what we're going to do is we are going to get that hit object, the object we collided with, which is going to be a bone, and then we need to loop up through the parent until we reach the parent, the top level parent. And if you watch my Ragdoll video, this is exactly what we did, because what we need to do is we need to make a Ragdoll out of the parent of that bone, which is the robot. And again, I went over this in my Ragdoll video, but I'm going to loop, find the parent until I can go up no more, and that's going to be the top level robot object. And if I say, is this name yellow robot, because that is the name of the object where we want to apply it to, then I want to get the controller. Basically, this is the script name. Remember, this is the good guy controller. That's the script name, and it has a function, a public function called make Ragdoll. Again, I went over this in my Ragdoll video. And then I'm going to make it a Ragdoll. So that is going to turn off all the kinetics. It's going to make all of the rigid body colliders active and apply gravity to, so it will collapse. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an explosive force to that component. And so technically this is going to call make Ragdoll twice, which doesn't hurt, one for each bone that it hits. I'm going to get the rigid body for the item that I collided with, and I'm going to add an explosive force to that rigid body. So you can imagine if this was spine 1 or spine 2, it's going to add an explosive force to that. By the amount of force will be whatever I passed in. It defaults to 100. It's going to, if we look at what this is, it's going to have the position of where the explosion is originating from. And it's originating from the point of the barrel. So the further away we get from the barrel, the less force that's going to be applied. The closer we are to the barrel, the more force that's going to be applied. That's why the explosion radius is important, because the radius is going to define how far out should this force be affected. And then this is the upward force. Let's see. The next one is the upward modifier. How much to modify the upward force to? Oh, actually, that's, oops, I'm mistaken. That's explosion radius. So when we hit that, what is the explosion radius that we're using? And then what's the upward modifier? And then the force mode is going to be impulse, because we want to just apply it once and not a continual force onto that item. So this is the script that was added. So let's take a look at our scene and how this is going to be applied. So we're back to our Unity scene. So we're looking from a top down because I want to illustrate something. So remember that explosion radius setting. So each one of these squares is 1. That's why I make this grid. So if you think of it, the explosion point's going to be here, kind of right in the front of the barrel where it hits. So if we think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Say if we made it 10. So you can think it's a radius, so that's going to be a round sphere. So if we made it exactly 10, that explosion force, that overlap sphere, is going to reach right to the front of his body, but not like to his arms. So when we calculate what colliders we're going to be detecting, it will only be kind of his head and his spine, maybe his legs, but definitely not his arms, because that's going to fall outside of that radius. So if you want to make sure to capture the whole thing, you'd have to set it to like at least maybe 12, which would go out to here and include his whole body. I mean, it really doesn't matter. You can detect everything. It's just going to be weaker and weaker the further you get away from this explosion radius. The further away from the explosion, it's not a defined radius. It's just going to be a weaker and weaker force the further you get away. So the second thing we're going to do is we're going to make it so part of the body parts can actually come disconnected from the rest of the armature and make him kind of fly apart. So what we're going to do is kind of look at the head. So what I've done is I got my yellow robot over here. I've expanded the armature, and if we select the head, and again, I went over all this in detail in my Ragdoll video, but what I've done is the Ragdoll, each one of my elements, the bone elements, have the colliders, the rigid body, and this character joint. And before all the items of the character joint, this break force was infinity, meaning that the body can't break apart. And what I've done is I've changed the break force to, say, 300. So depending on the explosive force and the distance away, if the explosive force that actually reaches the body is greater than this number, then it's going to break apart. So let's see what happens. So let's run this. So now let's see it. We're in play mode, so we're going to hit the space bar. And so what we saw is that the amount of force reaching that robot was greater than 300. We see the head rolling away. Really has no friction. It's a round collider, so he just kept rolling away. So if we come in here and we make the force higher, say 500, and it's really hard to tell. I don't know the exact calculations that they use for all this. So now you can see that, oh, it didn't break apart right away, but him colliding with the ground added enough force for the head to fall off. So by playing around with the explosive force amount and that break force, you can decide what body parts will kind of come apart in what conditions. And again, we can do this for all the body parts. We could make arms or legs, or we could apply this to all the joints, so he always falls apart. The last quick thing I wanted to look at is that his head just kept rolling and rolling and rolling. And this isn't kind of a physics demonstration, but if you wanted that to stop, let's set this back to 300. We have this linear dampening on the rigid body at 0, which means that the energy is never dampened, meaning it never is reduced as it goes along. So if we set this like the 0.5, what we can do is we can see now when the head falls apart, he doesn't go rolling forever. It kind of slows down and eventually stops. So that is our demonstration. We can see how we had our barrel blow apart. We can control our actual Ragdoll body parts kind of flying apart if we want. And it gives kind of a fun different way of destroying our enemies. So hope you liked this video. I'm going to do a couple more, I think, on different destruction situations of your enemies. And if you look forward to that, keep watching my videos, and thanks for watching.